Hi everyone. Welcome to Terrifying Trios, the place where horror movies and books are combined in a petrifying pairing. Our theme this month is rules, specifically how the idea of rules in a horror setting can keep characters safe, relatively speaking, or be their doom. Content warning. The following movies and books contain discussions of suicide, drunk driving, graphic violence, including scenes of characters being murdered by projectiles and other weapons, blunt force trauma, vehicular trauma, and suffering grievous injury from similar incidents. Viewer and reader discretion is advised. And as always, spoilers ahead. Our first movie this time is The Blackening from 2022. A group of friends from college plans to reunite for a Juneteenth gathering. At first, it seems that they're in for a fun weekend of partying in the middle of nowhere. After all, the house that Morgan rented seems pretty nice. Until Morgan and her significant other Sean discover a game room in the basement, the centerpiece of which is a game called The Blackening, featuring a racist caricature of a black person in the middle of the board. Soon, a voice is ordering the couple to play the game, and when Sean gives the wrong answer to a question, an arrow is shot into his neck, and he quickly bleeds to death. This is just a few minutes after Morgan and Sean comment on the horror movie trope of killing off the most famous actor in a cast quickly because the movie budget can't afford them. Sean, by the way, is played by SNL alum Jay Farrow, and yes, I know that there's nothing less funny than explaining a joke, so I won't make a habit of this. Morgan's fate is unknown for a bit. She attempts to flee, but an unseen figure catches her in the darkness just as the opening credits begin. The next day, the rest of the group arrives at the rented house. We first meet Allison, Dwayne, and Lisa. The first two have mixed feelings about their friend King bringing Namdi with him for the weekend. Lisa and Namdi used to date back in college, until he cheated on her. Then there's Shanika, who stops at a rural convenience store for gas, where she is unnerved by the clerk's baleful stare. At the store, she's surprised to run into Clifton, an awkward man who was on the periphery of the group back in college. He says that he's also come for the weekend at the rented house. Clifton is played by Jermaine Fowler, who's had some great roles over the past few years, but my favorite is still the Dancing Plague episode of Puppet History. Go ahead and watch that too. You're already on YouTube. Before they can even get inside the house, though, the five friends, King and Namdi have joined the original trio, are stopped by police officer Ranger White, played by Diedrich Bader, who older listeners may remember from The Drew Carey Show. He says that the owners usually only rent to... The blank is filled in by one of the group who says, white people, but he answers, families, somewhat unconvincingly. However, Ranger White leaves, and the friends gladly move past the unsettling microaggression and begin unpacking. Once inside, we learn that Lisa and Namdi have gotten back together. Namdi has grown as a person since college, and Lisa was willing to give him another chance. The actors that play this pair, Antoinette Robertson as Lisa and Sinqua Walls as Namdi, have great chemistry, and you believe them as a couple that's trying to make it work, though they're not quite ready to tell their friends about their rekindled romance, after how things ended back in college. Of course, this is a horror movie, so these two making out is a good explanation for why these two don't notice strange things about the house they're in, like unexplained sounds, or, once night falls, the presence of one or more people lurking outside. Dwayne, who is gay and the group's main party instigator, is like Lisa and Namdi, in that he's distracted from the possibility of danger by having a good time. He has a sense that something might be off in the house, but after drinks and some recreational drug use, he's ready to settle in, play games, and have fun. Finally, Shanika and Clifton arrive, and when the game of spades is suggested, it's clear that the rivalry here, boys versus girls, was a thing in college. As the group discusses this, though, the lights go out. Thinking that a fuse must have blown, the friends venture into the basement, where they find the Blackening, set up and waiting in the game room. The group is disgusted by the game's racist imagery, but then the voice from the start of the film returns and insists that they play, if they want to save Morgan's life. A video of Morgan then appears on the room's TV, and while the group agrees that this is the kind of nonsense that gets people killed in horror movies, they feel that they have no choice but to play if they want to help Morgan. Plus, at this point, the basement door has been locked. At first, things go well, and everyone answers their questions correctly, until they get a question about black guest stars on the TV series Friends. Morgan's would-be murderer tries to grab her hair, but she briefly escapes when her wig is literally snatched. Her fate unclear, the voice tells the group that they must choose who dies if they want to escape. And they should choose whoever is the blackest. No one wants to volunteer to die, obviously. And because this is a horror comedy, each person comes up with a reason that identifies them as being less than capital B black, whether that's being biracial, or in Clifton's case, having voted for Donald Trump. Twice. That revelation causes the group to choose him, since he wasn't really their friend before, and they certainly don't like him any better in what has suddenly become a very stressful situation. So, when Clifton steps outside, he is shot in the chest by an arrow, and the basement door unlocks, allowing the rest of the group to escape. At this point, the 6 friends realize that they have a choice to make. Sure, in situations like this, it's a bad idea to split up, and it would be wise to just flee the house and never look back. But all their vehicles have been rendered undrivable, so leaving means doing so on foot. Maybe it would be safer to shelter in the house until morning. With these differences of opinion in mind, the group of 6 splits into 2 groups of 3. Allison, King, and Shanika leave in search of help, while Dwayne stays in the house with Lisa and Namdi. Soon, Ranger White reappears, and while the group is at first skeptical that he isn't part of this whole murder game, he tells them to get in his car while he looks around. In his patrol car, they find a mask that looks just like the one they saw the killer in Morgan's video wearing, so they lock Ranger White out of the car. He admits that he knows how this looks, but he claims to have found the mask while patrolling, and before the trio can discuss this further, White is shot in the neck with an arrow. Meanwhile, out in the woods, Allison, King, and Shanika must face a second masked killer. Though King is injured, he has a bad time in this movie in terms of getting shot with projectiles. Finally, the 3 kill the man, who turns out to be the guy Shanika saw working at the convenience store. While this is happening, Lisa's group faces the other killer, and she ultimately beats him to death, caving in his skull in a scene that seems both traumatic and cathartic for the character. No, she doesn't want to hurt anyone, but she also doesn't want to die. In a world in which women, particularly women of color, defending themselves from violence are sometimes treated as criminals, this is another thing that I think many horror viewers enjoy. In this moment, we aren't thinking about what comes next and how the police might approach the scene in the morning. We want Lisa to live, and she does. Her actions are justified, and Dwayne and Namdi are impressed, if a little intimidated. In the man's pockets, the group finds evidence that he was paid by someone to come to the house and murder the group. We know that the 2 now dead killers were twins, but of course, the question is, who hired them? The answer, of course, is Clifton, who's not really dead. He explains after threatening the trio in the house to make them descend into the basement. Not the game room basement, but the murder basement that contains a deep stone well. That after a college party, in which his actions lost the guys a particularly contentious game of spades, his quote-unquote black card was revoked by the friends. Clifton loves games, but he never excelled at spades, and in feeling slighted by his so-called friends, he drank too much that night, and killed a woman while he was driving home drunk. After 4 years in prison, Clifton wanted revenge for the time he lost. He blames the group for questioning his blackness and causing him to drink to excess. So now he plans to murder the 3 people in front of him and dump their bodies in the stone well, which is where Sean and Morgan ended up. Lisa and Dwayne communicate non-verbally about how to stop Clifton. Then Namdi finds he can also understand them. But unfortunately, so can Clifton. But before he can kill anyone, the trio manages to knock him into the well to his death. But probably not really. When the trio from the woods returns to the house, the 6 friends wait until morning. Everyone agrees that calling the police might not be the safest option under the circumstances. 6 black adults in the middle of nowhere, waiting at the scene of a multiple homicide, which included a cop, seems like a recipe for disaster. Which is why Dwayne tells the group that they should call the fire department. Of course, even after escaping a fiendish murder plot, our heroes still have to live with racism, because the movie ends with all 6 being sprayed by a fire hose. I really enjoyed this film. Some reviewers seem to think that it should have been funnier and or scarier, but as someone who grew up with the Scary Movie franchise, much of which hasn't aged particularly well, I was more than ready for smart, self-aware characters who navigate horror movie scenarios as best they can. This cast is likable, the story plays with tropes like the red herring of Ranger White, plus the quote-unquote rule of sex and drugs equaling death in scary movies. And while most horror fans won't be surprised by the events of this film, they'll enjoy a knowing laugh while rooting for the heroes. With Clifton's demise called into question by his laughter coming from the well, I'm really looking forward to the sequel. I give this film 500 points, because that's often the predetermined number of points needed to win at spades. Our next movie is Talk to Me, an Australian horror production, which first came out in 2022 but was released in the US in 2023. In the beginning, viewers find themselves at a teen party where a young man named Cole is looking for his brother. He's concerned about his brother's well-being, and it turns out that his concern is warranted, since the prologue of this movie ends with Cole being stabbed and his brother killing himself, while multiple people at the party record the incident. Next, we meet Mia, a teenager grieving her mother's death. It's been 2 years since her mother died after taking too many sleeping pills, and the distance between Mia and her father has only grown. Because of this, Mia spends much of her time with her best friend Jade's family, though Jade isn't thrilled with the idea. Mia, Jade, and Jade's younger brother Riley sneak out of the house. Miranda Otto is Jade and Riley's mom. She played a mom in one of the Annabelle movies, too, and I always enjoy seeing actors of this caliber having fun in horror roles. The trio go to a party hosted by Haley and Joss, two friends from school, who introduce them to a creepy game. By holding hands with an embalmed, severed arm and saying, "Talk to me," followed by, "I let you in," players can communicate with the dead. However, the most important rule of the game is this. After 90 seconds, you have to let go of the hand and blow out a candle, or the spirit you're speaking with may become attached to you. Mia goes first, and is possessed for just a little over 90 seconds. Though the experience unnerves everyone watching, it's also fascinating to witness, and more than a little thrilling. Mia, almost certainly thinking of her mother, and relieved that there's an afterlife, wants nothing more than to play again. The next night, Mia joins Jade, Jade's boyfriend Daniel, Riley, and his friend James at the siblings' house. Their mother is out, so Haley and Joss bring over the severed arm to play the group's new favorite game. Since James and Riley are a bit younger than the others, Jade and the other older teens don't allow them to be possessed, but the rest take turns, both communing with the dead and recording their friends during their 90-second possessions, in which their speech and behavior change dramatically, and their pupils are blown black, as seen in the movie poster for this film, which features Mia. Riley begs Jade and Mia to let him try, but Jade firmly refuses. However, when Jade leaves the room, Mia relents, saying that he can only try for 50 seconds. The spirit that possesses Riley claims to be Ree, Mia's mother. Because of this, Mia begs the group to let the possession continue beyond the 90-second time limit, hoping to hear more from her mom, who seems to want to clear the air with her daughter. But after the time limit, the spirit possessing Riley attempts suicide, slamming his head repeatedly into hard surfaces until he's unconscious. He's taken to the hospital, badly injured by the blunt force trauma to his face and head. Mia is blamed for this incident. Sue, Jade and Riley's mom, thinks she's a bad influence, having supposedly used drugs once in the past, though, given that Mia is black and Jade's family is white, this accusation seems a bit racially tinged. And of course, the explanation for the brutal injuries that Riley seemingly inflicted on himself is drugs. Jade knows the truth, but of course, she doesn't tell her mother, and instead goes along with Sue, furious at Mia for letting Riley play the game. Heartbroken, Mia tells Daniel, who has stayed with Jade to wait for news of Riley, that given the late hour, he can stay over at her house. They fall asleep, and though the two are friends, and both care about Jade, Daniel is soon startled when he wakes to find Mia sucking on his toes. Mia doesn't remember deciding to do this, though. In fact, she was asleep and saw a spirit sucking Daniel's toes. Or at least she thought she did. From this point on, it's clear that Mia's experiences with the possessed hand, which she snuck home from the party, are having lingering effects. When she uses the hand to reach out to her mother, Ree says that her death was an accidental overdose, and that Mia must help Riley, who is apparently still possessed. That's why, whenever he wakes up in the hospital, he tries to kill himself again. With help from Haley and Joss, Mia finds and talks with Cole, who has recovered after being stabbed at the start of the film. He explains that, at least in his understanding, a healthy human body will reject spirits of the dead. So Riley's injuries make him susceptible to further harm from spirits seeking to possess him. It's at this point that Max, Mia's father, finally shows her Ree's suicide note. He didn't want to hurt his daughter by telling her what really happened, but now he believes that it was harmful to keep the truth from her. However, Rhee's spirit, at this point, you wonder if it's really her or not, tells Mia that Max is lying. Mia goes to her room, but soon after, her father enters and attempts to kill her, and she stabs him in what she believes is self-defense. However, when the real Max comes to her aid, she actually stabs him in the neck and flees the house. Obviously, part of what makes this movie frightening is that, in many scenes, Mia can't be sure what's real, so neither can viewers. At this point, Rhee's spirit, or a hallucination of such, tells Mia that the only way to free Riley from the pain of possession is to kill him. When she visits the hospital, Mia and Sue seemingly reconcile. Sue apologizes for blaming Mia for what happened to Riley. Now she thinks, after several drug tests have come back negative, that Riley must have injured himself due to undiagnosed mental health issues, and she blames herself for not seeing what was going on. Mia asks if she can have a moment alone with her friend, and of course Sue obliges. By the time Jade calls Sue and tells her that something is wrong with Mia, Mia has already left the hospital, pushing Riley in a wheelchair toward the nearby highway. As she approaches the busy road, it becomes clear that Mia could just let Riley go. The wheelchair would roll down the hill and into oncoming traffic. And while Rhee tells Mia to do exactly that, instead, at the last moment, Mia herself jumps in front of a car. We next see her in the hospital. She was badly hurt, but now Mia watches her father leaving in an elevator, the wound in his neck apparently having been treated. Mia sees Jade and Sue talking with Riley, who has recovered, but they can't hear her. No one sees her either. She can't see her reflection, and she realizes with dawning dread what has happened. Gradually, lights go out. Mia, to her horror, is left alone in the dark. The next thing she sees is a man speaking Greek. He is holding the severed arm, but through that, by the light of a candle, he is reaching out to Mia. He says in English, "I let you in," and Mia reaches for his hand. This film is a haunting meditation on grief, family, and what can happen when the living are determined to make contact with the dead. Mia is a compelling protagonist, and while her pain over her mother's death is understandable, the isolation she feels comes not just from her father's distance, but from the fact that those around her don't fully understand her pain. This is a story about grief, of course, but it also parallels something true for people of color everywhere. The white friends and loved ones may do their best to be anti-racist. There is pain that will never be fully understood, sympathy that is extended, but which isn't the same as empathy. Where the severed arm came from, and how it became a possession vector, is never explained, though of course, this may well be a factor in the inevitable sequel. Scary because of great performances by the cast, especially during possession scenes. This movie doesn't rely on extensive gore to be frightening. It doesn't have to. Rather, the horror the characters face is more quotidian. To die is one thing, but the writers of this film play with the fear of not just being dead, but being left alone, left behind in a personal void, unable to make contact with the people you most want to speak to. I give this film 4 petrified fingers out of 5. Our book this time is You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kalynn Bayron. Charity Curtis's summer job is at Camp Mirror Lake, which is a local legend in upstate New York for being the setting of the 1983 horror classic, The Curse of Camp Mirror Lake. After 2 summers, Charity's job duties have increased dramatically. She basically runs the camp, which isn't a camp, but rather a full-contact horror experience. Camp Mirror Lake has no advertising budget because it doesn't need one. Word of mouth alone makes the place famous, and people come from all over to spend an evening trying to survive the combination escape room / slasher survival role-playing game. While Charity mixes fake blood, the best recipe includes Caro syrup, red food coloring, but also a drop or 2 of yellow and green, and dish soap to stop the liquid from beading on skin. She also keeps her coworkers on task. But Charity's favorite part of her job is playing the final girl, the only person guaranteed to survive the night. Winning guests who make it to the front gate without dying, quote-unquote, get a free t-shirt, though some nights there are no winners. Obviously, a job where you live in the middle of nowhere for most of the summer isn't for everyone. Charity enjoys Camp Mirror Lake in large part because it allows her to make money while also getting away from her mom and her mom's boyfriend, Rob. He made Charity apply for this job, which is the only thing she can say in favor of Rob. While Charity is close with the employees who she also knows from school, other staff are a lot less reliable. In fact, with just a few nights left in the season, Charity finds herself working with a skeleton crew. Counting Charity herself, there are only 5 teen employees left at the camp. 3 people on staff just left without notice, and they aren't replying to texts in the work group chat. Sadly, Charity isn't exactly surprised. She knows from experience that this job tends to attract people who either take it too seriously and sometimes have to be fired when they express a bit too much interest in the possibility and legality of accidentally murdering a guest, and people who could care less if things run smoothly. And the owner of the camp isn't any help. Though Charity is not quite 18 and there's supposed to be an adult on site at all times, the spotty cell phone reception at the rural camp means that calls don't always get through. You can leave a message, but sending a text is usually your best bet. So, to get ready for the last 2 nights of the season, Charity texts her friend Paige and her girlfriend Bezzy to come help out. Paige loves horror and is more than happy to work as a victim and get some photos for the school paper. Bezzy is a little creeped out by the whole Camp Mirror Lake experience, but she's fine with working in the control room, where audio and visual effects are deployed. She doesn't mind watching other people be scared, and Charity assures her that everything will work out fine. A group of 6 for the penultimate night, and then the grand finale that ends the season should run smoothly with 2 more people helping the staff. After all, Charity works hard, knows how to run the game, and she's the final girl. This is, of course, the kind of confidence that would probably serve Charity well in real life, but here, it's the kind of hubris that causes trouble for people in horror novels. It probably goes without saying that things don't go as planned. Before the final night, Charity gets a call from her boss telling her to shut down early. Charity is okay with that, but first she has to locate her friends and coworkers, who are suddenly nowhere to be found. Spoiler, they're dead. Soon, Charity and Bezzy are trying to survive for real, and to do that, they have to unravel what really happened at Camp Mirror Lake years ago. There have always been creepy rumors, of course. In the off-season, sometimes hikers come upon what looks to be an abandoned summer camp, and urban legends get started about weird sights, strange things in the water. Except maybe those aren't just stories. After all, even before everything fell apart, Charity noticed some odd things. The communal bathroom unlocked, splashes in the supposedly empty lake, and what looked like someone in the water, only to have the figure in question disappear. Yes, Charity is the final girl at Camp Mirror Lake, but that was only a game. Surviving a real murder looks very different, especially when the killer in question may have something in common with the masked monsters of slasher films. While reviews of this novel have pointed out the lack of character development, I would argue that that's more of a feature than a bug in a horror novel that's a celebration of the slasher genre. I feel the same about the fact that the novel moves from standard horror, as in, oh no, there's a serial killer, to, oh no, something supernatural must be afoot because that's the only explanation for what's happening. I mean, that's Friday the 13th. That's most Halloween movies. No mass killer would just keep coming back forever if there weren't something else going on. Sometimes it's druids or curses or some vague explanation about evil, but whatever the reason for the killer's tenacity, more often than not, I enjoy the slasher genre, so I enjoyed this book. Its length made it feel like a 90-minute movie, where of course, you don't get everyone's backstory, but Charity and her relationship with Bezzy were bright spots. And if possible, listen to the audio version of this book at night, in the dark, to really enjoy the excellent horror vibe. I give this novel 3 buckets of fake blood out of 4. In theory, rules exist to keep us safe. Some seem obvious during a dangerous situation, to the point that in horror movies it becomes a bit of a joke when characters split up or realize that they probably shouldn't split up. In games, taking turns is supposed to keep things fair. Of course, the games discussed this month have, by definition, inherent dangers involved. Missing a question or spending too much time possessed can have deadly consequences. So can working in a place where a game of pretend murder suddenly turns real. Of course, a game is hardly fair when players are subject to rules they never agreed to. All of the characters in these stories are isolated, either socially or geographically, or both. While most of the characters discussed this month survive, the fact that they are Black, and in several cases women and or queer people, mean that even if they make it through a potentially dangerous situation, you have to wonder what might happen next. Will the authorities help them, or blame them for what happens in these tales? Until rules, and by extension of that term, laws, are equitably written and enforced, the fact remains that, to paraphrase Frank Wilhote, if you're a white person of means, the law protects but does not bind you. If you're anyone else, but especially a person of color, the law binds but does not protect you. In the real world, in which BIPOC people in particular are still marginalized, horror invites us, beneath the veneer of a scary story, to explore some tougher questions. Specifically, who do rules protect? What rules are tied up in safety? And which simply enforce the status quo? I'm happy to see horror becoming more diverse, because these questions are important. And the answers are, very often, terrifying. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another terrifying trio.